Alrighty, we're back for another exciting edition of COVIDleaf Radio. I'm the host of the most, the king of the quarantine, Jimmy Falcon, and we are back. And absolutely honored to welcome Bill Kinison to the show. How are you, Bill?
Doing good, Ian. How you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Where you broadcasting out of?
I am about 45 minutes south of Champaign.
All right. Well, that was my old stomping grounds, Central Illinois.
Oh, yeah, and I was curious, that is part of my first question, what it was like growing up in Peoria and attending, of course, the University of Illinois.
Well, growing up in Peoria, actually, we did live in the projects in Peoria.
Oh, wow.
Till I was probably about 10, and then we moved on up and lived in the church in East Peoria that my dad pastored. And we lived there till it was pretty much grown.
Oh, wow.
And, now Sam used to do a routine about, he could stay in Peoria, lose half his teeth, and get a job at Caterpillar, or he could come to California and be a comedian. So he felt like he made the right decision.
Yeah, I think people still find it hard to believe that he was actually a Pentecostal preacher, and of course you and your brothers and your father as well. It seemed like a family thing.
Yeah, it was kind of the family business, even though we were never encouraged by our dad to get in the ministry. Matter of fact, he told me, I want you to go to college and do anything but preach, and then if you can't be happy, then be a preacher. Uh-huh. And so that's pretty much what I did.
I'm sure it's worked out pretty nice for you.
Yeah. I had a good life.
Well, besides that, you were also Sam's manager, even produced some of his shows. How did all this come about, you become working with him?
He at 25, he caught his wife in an affair, and he went to in our circles, Pentecostal circles, that's real strict. Mm-hmm. That was the death knell for preachers. That was the unpardonable sin, as if you got a divorce. And so he was through in the ministry. I was pastoring in Rockford, Illinois at the time, and he came up there, and he was about as low and devastated as I'd ever seen him. And so he told me what all happened, and then I said, well, and I always felt like the Sam only was in the ministry because of my dad. He was named after my dad, and wow. And everything. And so I said, well, I want you to forget that your brothers are preachers and your dad was a preacher and your friends are all preachers. I want you to look down in your heart and find out what you've always wanted to do. And I thought he'd take, a few days. And he took about 5 seconds and said, I always wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And so I said, well, then set a date. And after that date, don't preach ever again, because if you go back, you're going to keep going back. And that's what he did. He went down to Houston and started getting in comedy, and was there for 2 years. Both years he was in Houston, he was the Texas Comedian of the Year, and then went out to the Comedy Store with 6 other comedians, including Bill Hicks, Yakov Smirnoff, and some pretty good ones, except Sam was like their God. And so they got out to California, and we all thought that, Sam he just hit. And Mitzi saw him at the Comedy Store, went up and showcased, and I remember him coming to her booth afterwards, and she said, "You're not funny. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a job as a doorman, and you can see how the pros do it." And so this guy that she thought wasn't funny, he worked as a doorman for 5 years and had built up an underground following of street people, celebrities, porno stars. And she'd hold him off till 2 o'clock in the morning because he would fill the club. And then Rodney Dangerfield talked us into going to New York, and the rest of it was history. So the way that I got involved was I was pretty much Sam's father figure. I pretty much raised my brothers, and he had kept asking me to manage him. Well, there wasn't anything to manage, but I would come out whenever, someone was interested or whatever. I'd fly out, and usually it wasn't anything. And then one Sunday morning, I was taking a shower and pastoring a great church in Rockford, Illinois. And while I'm taking a shower, it was just like something inside of me went, it's time to do something else. And so I remember telling my wife on the way to church, this is going to be my last service as a pastor. And she said, what are we going to do? And I said, well, we'll go out to California we got enough money to last us a couple of years out there and try to manage Sam. And Sam hit about 6 weeks after I got there, but it wasn't because of me. It was really because of Rodney. And that's how I started managing him and managed him till he died.
Wow. That had to be something interesting, a wild roller coaster, I'm sure.
Well, it was never boring. Never boring. And I end up with shingles. I end up in divorce. And everything else. And Sam was a handful. I used to tell him, man, I don't manage you. I'm a babysitter. So I'd like to see what I could actually do with your career. But I said, I'm having to put out fires every day just to keep you going, which was pretty much the truth. But I also did a great job of managing him and making business decisions and things for him. And if I had it all to do over again, I'd do the same thing.
You even took a drug rap for him.
Yes, I did. I didn't even drink.
Wow. And
we were at LAX, and I was putting together a deal, or trying to put together a deal with MTV, and we were calling it the Party Train. And what it was is Sam would go from the East Coast to the West Coast, and on the way, he'd have bands with him like Bon Jovi or Guns N' Roses, or they all wanted to hang with Sam. And so we would have different concert places on this where they would stop on the train, and Sam would do a show with one of these big bands. And so the DEA was tapping our phones, and we didn't know that. You didn't have cell phones back then. And they thought we was putting together a drug thing. Like Sam needed to sell drugs on the road.
Wow.
And so they set up a sting at the airport when we was getting ready to fly out, take a red eye to Cincinnati and start a 40-city tour. And now I won't go into all the detail, but eventually they got to Sam's black carry-on bag, and they were asking on all the luggage, will you sign this waiver for us to check your luggage? If not, then we'll keep you here until we get a search warrant. And so they got this black bag, which was Sam's, and he goes, Bill, they want to know if they can check your luggage. And I go, what do you got? And he said, I got a little bit of pot. So I go over and tell this sergeant, all right, this black bag is mine, and there's a little bit of pot in there. I smoke out to go to sleep on the tour bus and stuff. And so the sergeant tells me, he was the one that was head of this setup. Anyhow, he tells me, no, don't worry about it. It's a $150 fine, misdemeanor. So I said, all right. Well, they opened up the bag, and it was over 2 ounces. It was the size of a soccer ball.
Oh, my gosh.
And so all of a sudden I was facing 3 felonies. And so I went into the drug intervention program. And now you got to remember, I didn't even smoke. Forget about doing any drugs. I mean, I didn't even drink. Forget about smoking pot or doing blow or anything else. I just never ever did it. And so I did 5 months in a rehab.
Wow.
And that was a lot of fun in California. Especially when I was the only white guy there.
Oh, my gosh. Well, what compelled you to write Brother Sam, the short, spectacular life of Sam Kinison?
Well, I figured with the kind of life that he had, somebody's going to write a book, so I wanted to be accurate. And I immediately, when he got killed, I immediately had agents, want to represent me on writing a book. And so that's why we wrote the book. And at first, especially like Sam's wife, Malika, I was really making her look good. And then I finally came in with the guy that was co-writing it with me. And I go, I can't do this, man. Either I tell the truth and I tell what was really, what was really the real, or I'm not going to do it. And so we decided, let's just do it. And that's what we did. So I thought it'd end up being a great book.
Wow. And as well, you appeared and were involved in Pauly Shore's Dead. What was that like?
You were talking about in his movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that went straight to video, didn't it?
I believe so.
Yeah, I think it did. I love Pauly, and we're still close friends to this day, but, he had a good run in movies and stuff. Then when he started trying to do his own, they pretty much just went to video. It was, I knew Pauly, Sam and I knew Pauly from when he was 12 years old. And so we watched this kid grow up at the Comedy Store, and Sam had a real heart for him. Because if you can imagine being that little and growing up in your teens and all the drugs and everything else, around, and, Mitzi having different boyfriends that would come home and whatever. I mean, that was tough. So Sam kind of took him under his wing, and so he was doing this movie, and he called me and said, hey, I want you to come down and do a little part in this movie. So I said, all right. So that's what I did. It was all improv. He didn't have a script for the movie. He just kind of would tell everybody what the theme was, and then you just went out and did it.
Wow. Yeah, I have so many of his films, love a lot of his stuff. He was really one of the kings of the 90s.
You know about Pauly?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Funny thing was, when he was on MTV, they said, and everything else, he was 18 years old, so all the kids would like him, and he was actually 25.
Wow.
And I'm going to tell you, Pauly, the way he talks, everything else, that is him. That's not a put on or anything else. From the time we've known him, he's always kind of made up his own language. And a good guy. I mean, he's grown now. He's like 50, but good guy. He was a good guy. Still is. He's coming to San Antonio in September and called me, and I told him I'd come over and meet him.
No, that'll be nice.
Yep.
And one final question. After all these years, nearly 30 since he's been gone, how would you like Sam to be remembered?
Oh, I think Sam pretty well set his legacy. He was a trailblazer for sure. He was uncompromising, and Sam never wrote a routine. People didn't know that, but he never wrote a routine.
Wow.
And every night was different. We did 280 shows a year, and one of the reasons I think I enjoyed it so much is that every show was different. It was whatever was going on that night. He was a genius storyteller, and he could make anything funny. I remember one of his first routines was the starving children, and Sam, doing that whole thing about, you know what this is saying? You know what's going to be 100 years from now? It's going to be saying. And so I told him afterwards, I said, well, if you can make fun of starving children and make people laugh, you better be funny or you're going to be out of this business. But he was. He could make anything funny. And I think most of the comedy experts or whatever you want to call them, they say Sam is in the top 5 of all time stand-up comedians, and I totally agree with them.
Oh, definitely. It was very